We have a regular Public Works Committee meeting scheduled. My name is Thad Kushak. I'm the chairperson of the Public Works Committee. In attendance, we also have Mr. Ryan Austin, committee member. Absent right now is Mr. Matt Zacher, committee member. Mr. Tom Rayom is in attendance. Mr. Joe Eichstead is in attendance, and Mr. Joe Terry is in attendance as well. I'll quick read the top just for transparency's sake. Notice is hereby given that a meeting of the Public Works Committee to be held on the first floor conference room. We are in the council chambers at 444 West Grand Avenue at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, July 6, 2021. The public may listen to the meeting by calling 1-312-626-6799, access code 822-2860-8736, pound symbol. And it's also available on the city's Facebook page and Community Media's YouTube channel. Item number 1 is called a meeting to order. I just did that. Item number 2 is review preliminary resolution for West Jackson Street from West Grand Avenue to Jackson Street Bridge. Mr. Eichstead, will you take this item?
So the preliminary resolution is included in your packet for West Jackson Street between West Riverview Expressway and the Jackson Street Bridge. The preliminary resolution follows the same format for all of our future projects where the city has an intent to levy special assessments. This is for construction in 2022 and includes permanent street surfacing, concrete sidewalk, concrete driveway approach, curb and gutter, and sanitary and water services, which we should strike the water services.
And then your recommendation is for approval, obviously, with the resolution.
That's correct.
Committee members, Mr. Austin, do you have any questions, concerns?
No questions. I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second that motion on the floor by Mr. Austin, second by Mr. Kubiszak for approval. Any further discussion? Mr. Rayom? Anybody else? Mr. Terry? With that being said, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, 2-0. We'll move on to item number 3, transportation utility model discussion. Review and discuss draft ordinance language and outline possible scope of public outreach. Mr. Terry, will you handle this?
Thank you. So included in your packet is a very rough draft of what a transportation utility ordinance might look like. Just for a little background information, I used the Village of Pewaukee's ordinance that uses the same methodology that's proposed. I also used language from our stormwater ordinance and our wastewater ordinance to develop this. My hope this evening is to review this for general content and not to dig deep into the weeds and address any of the nuances. Our city attorney is in the process of reviewing this with staff to do that part of it. But we do need to touch on some of the high points. And so with your permission, I'll walk through this and we can stop and discuss any of the particulars, get some guidance from the committee, and update this draft then for review at an upcoming meeting. The first couple sections is essentially some legalese. When we get onto the second page, 51.06 includes definitions. I don't think we need to go through that. On page 3, 51.07 describes the Transportation Utility Fund and what it's to be used for, that the revenue generated by the transportation utility shall be used only for the following. And it lists transportation-related administration costs, street pavement preservation activities, So grind, inlay, slurry, seal, crack seal, chip seal, or other generally accepted means of maintenance. Street construction and/or reconstruction activities, sidewalk construction or reconstruction of sidewalks identified on the official sidewalk map. We may change the wording on that to street map and include sidewalks so it's one map. Street lighting and appurtenances, traffic control and signalization, maintenance, construction or reconstruction, structures used for the storage, maintenance, and repair of transportation-related operational equipment. It was suggested to leave this broad enough to cover any general transportation-related expenses. When we get into the fee page, which is the last page, that narrows it down to what the fee is proposed to be, and then, of course, what it can be used. Well, the fee and what it generates won't generate funding for a lot of these activities. There's just not enough there based on the motion from the previous meeting. But it was still recommended to include items that the utility could cover should the city wish to do that. In that case, in the future, like our wastewater ordinance, we would only need to change the fee schedule and not dig back into the full ordinance and change any particular language. Now, that's up to the council's, decision. If you want to narrow that down a little bit, we certainly can do that. If you want to discuss that a little further at this point. If not, I can move on and keep moving through this.
I guess I'll interject that having all-inclusive, the list that you have, I think that it can, potentially be changed, and the council has the authority to change it. But no, having an inclusive list rather than an exclusionary list is proper, at least for the time being. So I don't know, Mr. Austin, if you have any comment on that.
No, I agree. I know the city has some needs, especially on the maintenance-related or operational equipment maintenance facilities, city garage and whatnot, so I think it's good to leave that open-ended for the time being.
And so it would be kind of similar in nature of a project plan for a TIF district. In other words, we wouldn't be able to use the fees on a particular project unless it's explicitly listed in there. So therefore, being inclusionary, I think, is the wise. So with that, continue on to the next one.
Section 2 of that 51.07 also. This is a language that's identical to the stormwater utility, and I know Sue is looking at it to see because for her it's just a little bit vague. The idea here is that these fees go into an exclusive transportation fund and can only be used for transportation-related activities, and that the Public Works Director would have the authority to use those funds for council-approved projects. That's the intent of this language for our stormwater utility. Instead of Director of Public Works, it's the city engineer, because the city engineer is responsible for the stormwater utility. There may be some minor adjustments because the city attorney's looking at that. But the purpose of this paragraph is to be even more specific, that those funds are basically used under your guidance, and staff makes that happen. Of course, the council's got to approve the projects. The next section is the transportation user fee. That every developed property owner shall pay a transportation user fee. The fee's based on the property's direct and indirect uses of benefits derived from the use of the transportation system. The next portions of that's similar to any other utility. It describes how it's paid, who can pay it, and if it's not paid, the city can proceed to collect the same as any of the other city utilities. Credits and adjustments. So this is one thing that was brought up in a question, is how do we treat special circumstances? So one of the things that we looked at was a waiver of fees. Where might it be appropriate not to charge any kind of fee? And the recommendation is that, and this may, again, the city attorney's looking at this, it may change to public parking lots or city parking lots, which are not associated with any services or uses other than public parking. The objective is pretty straightforward there. The parking lot is for everybody. It's not for a business, it's not for a cluster of businesses. And so that's where she was thinking maybe the word public, if the city eventually built a parking ramp or a parking structure that's more significant than what the city already has. That in and of itself isn't drawing the traffic, it's the businesses that the people that are using that parking lot are going to that's generating the traffic. So that's one of the recommendations, is that those particular facilities wouldn't receive any kind of a transportation fee. Undeveloped publicly owned parkland, open spaces, and greenways. That'd be like the median between the expressway. If there's other parkway areas that are lands, but that aren't parks. And then there's an exception. Unless public off-street parking designated to accommodate the use of such areas provided. That's where a park, one of the city parks, for example, would receive or would have to pay a transportation utility fee because it generates trips. The third one is undeveloped properties. And that we discussed at some length. There is a benefit for undeveloped properties to have the street adjacent to them. That said, those properties do not currently have any other kind of bill. They don't pay this, they're exempt from paying a stormwater fee. There's no other fees associated. And so the thought was that, well, we've got a two-phase or two-part billing system. Part of it is a fixed or base rate, and part of it is trip rate. And that the base rate may be appropriate for those parcels. But when we look at the administrative costs of creating and collecting bills for those parcels and the small amount that base fee is, it really didn't make any sense at all. And talking to some, like R.A. Smith that also worked on the Village of Pewaukee's, they did the same thing, is they exempted undeveloped properties because it was going to cost more to bill it than you'd get. So that's what's proposed for waivers. Then there's two adjustments that are proposed. One is a vacancy fee adjustment. A building, whether it's a residential building, an office building, retail space, a mill, when any property in the city becomes vacant, and the word vacant is in the glossary, a waiver of the usage fee may be granted, and then some conditions upon that. It's got to be 30-day notice, 3 months minimum that it needs to be vacated, and there's no waiver for the base fee. So there's still a small base fee. One of the things we talked about is, well, what happens, just as an example, what happens, I own a house and I'm going to Arizona for 3 months over the winter. There is an administrative fee that's proposed for review of these types of activities. And when you take a look at a minor administrative fee is likely going to cost as much as what because the transportation fees at this point in time are so small that it wouldn't pay for anyone to do that. If it's a business property and they're selling, maybe a business closed out or a tenant left, and they're going to spend the next 4 months remodeling, depending on that use, it may be very beneficial for that property owner to utilize this this adjustment, this fee adjustment. And that makes sense. The building's vacant, it's not being used, they're not generating traffic, and therefore wouldn't be paying the full amount of fees. There'd be a reduction. The other proposed adjustment is the assessed party fee adjustment. The total fee for an assessed party again is in the definitions. It's a property owner that received an assessment from the city for a transportation-related project, and whether they paid it in full or they're making payments, whatever that term was that they were allowed to make payments, their fees would be reduced by 25% to recognize the burden of having paid a special assessment for street replacement during the last 5, 10, or 15 years as identified by the notice of assessment. Again, generally, this is going to be a pretty small amount, especially for a residential property owner. So in no way, shape, or form does it come close to a one-for-one that they'll get relief from this program that may equal what they paid in assessments. It just doesn't happen, because this program spreads those costs out, and the costs are so small, that if it's $86 a year, they're paying $7 a month, 25% off of that's not a whole lot, but you look at $86 a year compared to maybe a $5,000 or $7,000 assessment, it's not much relief, but it is about the same percentage of the cost of the project, about 25% by the time they're done paying for the street and the curb and gutter. Their assessment's about 25% of the cost of the street. Person across the street's paying about 25%, and then the city's picking up the rest. So we felt that 25% was representative and justifiable, because that's what they're paying through the assessment process.
On that, Mr. Terry, that would be, it says total fee, so that would be the base fee and the trip fee combined minus 25%.
Correct.
Okay.
Then the other part of that is that the assessed party fee adjustment will expire at the same time the assessment would have ended had the assessed party paid installments consistent with the notice of assessment. So if somebody sells their property, that assessment at that point in time is paid in full, and neither the old property owner nor the new property owner would any longer qualify for an assessed party fee adjustment. So over a period of time, and within 15 years, this ordinance could be reviewed and paragraph 3 could be removed, because there wouldn't be anyone at that point in time that would qualify any longer. 1510 gets into the fee itself. Transportation user fee shall be comprised of a base fee and trip fee as identified in Table A. The base fee is a fee that is equal for all utility accounts. It recognizes that each utility account is receiving a uniform benefit of access to the transportation system, and includes administrative costs and those fixed capital, operating, and maintenance costs of the transportation system that are not recoverable by the usage fee or other confirmed revenue source. The base fee is determined by dividing the total amount of fixed base costs by the total number of utility accounts. So when we finally get our spreadsheet and we can set that down that lists every property in the city, part of that table includes what we're trying to budget for. What do we want the utility to generate per year to cover the costs of our projects? That number, 10% of that spread equally amongst all the properties, is how the base fee is calculated. It's very straightforward and simple. The trip fee is the fee on each account that is determined by multiplying the number of trips assigned to the utility account by the per trip rate. To explain that a little bit, the ITE manual, as it defines the number of trips, we take a look at all the properties in the city. Once they've been defined that this type of property should be generating this type of trip, or this number of trips, we add all the trips together. I think we have forget the number that is currently on the list, but it's, hundreds of thousands of trips. That's then divided out, and 90% then of what the amount that we're trying to raise with the utility is divided out per trip that way. And then a residential property, for example, is 9 trips. Then that per trip cost is broken out that way. So again, it's pretty straightforward. The biggest question is the trip assignments using that manual. And we'll go through some of that information momentarily. So the base fee and trips fee, this is kind of that table A part. The base fee and trip rate shall be an amount set forth from time to time by resolution of the Common Council and is described in table A. This is almost verbatim with our wastewater ordinance. Staff shall present the City Common Council with draft resolution proposing an adjustment based on the proposed transportation system improvements budget for the projected improvement program timeframe. Any adjustment of the charges shall be effective on the date determined in the resolution. I left this as time to time in the event that, it's probably going to be reviewed annually. There are some benefits if it's not changed more than annually. There may be some benefits and some disadvantages if it's set for a period of time longer than that. Advantage of having a longer time period is that for the commercial and industrial properties, sometimes the predictability is more valuable than maybe paying a little more in fees for some manufacturers, for example. That can be changed, but for the moment I include just from time to time, just so that it's at the council's discretion.
Mr. Terry, are we able to align that with the same schedule for the stormwater utility or even the other utilities as well? Because those are kind of chosen and they're for a 12-month calendar period, are they?
Yes, it is, and it's generally reviewed on a 12-month calendar. But I'm trying to think back, a few of the wastewater adjustments, because of some of the discussions that ensued about the rationale, the methodology, sometimes those adjustments were delayed. I think one of them, in the last 6 years, I think one was delayed until maybe July-ish, with an effective date at maybe beginning of the third quarter or something like that. So it's not that they've always been uniform, so that January 1st, first quarter. In speaking with our water and electric department, who would likely be the work group to administrate the billing, their desire is, look, January 1, that's what makes the most sense. It keeps it consistent for them. I think that should be maybe not part of the ordinance, but certainly part of a policy that, we want to keep that administrative workload as reasonable as possible and cooperate as much as possible given the sharing that takes place to make that happen. Section 3 or paragraph 3 for this. For each utility account, the Director of Public Works shall determine the category of use from the ITE manual that shall apply to each developed utility account within the city. In the absence of a specific use category from within the ITE manual for a particular developed use, the DPW shall determine the appropriate category by interpreting the IT manual and assigning the category that most accurately reflects the traffic generated by the particular developed use. This language continues a little bit. It does allow the Director of Public Works may require and consider the results of a traffic study, provided that such a study shall be conducted by a registered professional engineer in conformance with the methodology outlined in the Wisconsin DOT Bureau of Traffic Operations Traffic Impact Analysis Guidelines, the latest edition. Currently, Chapter 3, Part B, titled Traffic Volumes. The determination of use category should not be considered a land use decision for the purpose of land use planning or land use planning. Just so that there's no cross-reference here that if it's determined that it's a certain use, that there's any complaint or implication that it's maybe improperly zoned or something like that. Totally different matter. And then a little later on, we'll get into some of the administrative appeal for that. If this passes, we'll obviously have to purchase a copy of that manual, and then similarly, just like you'd reassess property in the city, from time to time, you'd want to do a full reevaluation. The dates are not described in here. Again, there's a process of property use changes, then that needs to be looked at, but we didn't get into any specific time period where, look, every 7 years, we're going to redo a full, do a full reevaluation of every parcel within the city and make sure that we're, totally up to speed. If there's a desire to do that, we certainly could.
That's a really interesting topic that you point out in terms of, where do you do it? When does it become out of sync, for example, with the assessment process where you look at the assessed ratio, the average assessed ratio, especially when you dip out of the 90 percentile and get into the 80% or the 120%, then that's when you got that graduated scale of not being equal. So then how do you even determine unequalness in the first place to be able to identify that you're unequal right now,
I would speculate that it would be any time that the ITE manual goes to a new edition. At that point in time, the trips based on use may change. And if there's any indication that, look, across the board, the number of trips per type of use is changing, well, then we need to reevaluate and make sure that that's consistent throughout the city. Even if the classification doesn't change, we'd need to go through and ensure that the number of trips that classification is generating represents reality as much as possible. So I think that would probably be the catalyst for a full review, is any type of significant change in the ITE manual.
If you want to put that for notation or at least for a suggestion, that'd be great, because then that's some type of a beginning step with that. And it seems like it'd be a very equitable beginning step.
Okay.
In the event a specific use category has to be determined by yourself or the Director of Public Works, would that be something that would then go to committee and council for approval?
Not unless the party would appeal it. And so, well, that's what's proposed right now. Obviously, we could do it that way. We could have any change reviewed by committee and then council, could go directly to council. The thought process is that it's referencing a technical manual, and staff generally should have the knowledge and experience to review that technical manual and make that initial determination. Section 51.11 would describe an appeal process if a party is not satisfied with the determination that staff makes. So if that's answering your question, we can keep moving on. Okay. Any utility account customer may appeal their category of use determination by filing a written appeal to the DPW and submitting the proper fee as described in Table A. The written appeal shall specify the grounds for challenge to category of use and shall state the category of use that the appellant considers to be appropriate. Has some time frame for submittal. If a bill is going to be adjusted, it needs to be within 30 days of when that bill was issued. The appeal may be based on a traffic study if the party maybe owns a business and says, look, this is not representative, and they conduct a traffic study, that can be used to help staff determine what category they should be. Paragraph 4, the DPW shall review the petition and make a determination. If there's an error in any order, decision, or determination pertaining to the classification, if the trip generation rate is within 10% of the rate used to generate the usage fee, no adjustments in the usage fee shall be made because this is within the expected margin for day-to-day variations. Once a determination has been made on a reclassification and/or fee, no additional request may be filed for the same parcel unless there's been a significant material change from the prior determination. So again, there would need to be a change in use. So the next bit talks about the appeal. Utility customer may appeal the decision of the DPW to the Public Works Committee for a recommendation, then to the City Common Council. That appeal must be filed in writing within 30 calendar days of the date of the decision by the DPW. And that's a question, I guess, is staff and the city attorney reviewed this. Number one, do we want appeals first reviewed by the DPW? Number two, if they're going to challenge that appeal, do we want it to go to committee? Because the committee will hear it. Most often what will happen then is the committee will make a recommendation unless this ordinance, unless the city council within the ordinance gives the committee the authority that, no, the committee's decision is final. Then you'd have your hearing, the decision is final. If it's more like general committee procedures, the committee would make a recommendation, and that recommendation goes to the common council. That provides a lot of opportunity for further discussion, some one-on-one conversations between whether it's staff, the petitioner, to other alderpersons, and potentially to have the hearing happen again at the common council meeting. So the arguments may be heard twice. So I guess the question is, number one, do you want those initial reviews to be done by staff? And number two, if there's an appeal, do you want the buck to stop somewhere? Obviously it stops with the common council, but if you want the buck to stop with the committee, for example, the ordinance can state that, and if the council approves it, all right, the committee has the final say. Or maybe it doesn't even go to committee because we don't want to hear everything twice. The hearing will be at the council meeting, the common council will decide the appeal. Those are some of the internal debates we were having as we were trying to draft this. So if you can offer any guidance as to your preference, I'd be glad to make that adjustment.
Mr. Terry, how do we handle, and I don't know if it's purely apples to apples, but how do we handle any potential disputes with either wastewater or, and that has a commission, or the stormwater, which, it may not necessarily be the same designation type of a thing, but is there any language in the ordinance that if there was some kind of appeal process for stormwater, how do we do that? And if there is, I guess I would lean toward trying to be as consistent as possible. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to have a zoning board of appeals hear this because it's a different animal.
Right.
But we in the nature of this, we should have an appeal process. But if we could be as similar with other utilities, that would be, more ideal.
I'll have to look again. I don't recall seeing an appeal process in either the stormwater or the wastewater ordinance. And I think that's because the method is metering and surface area. It's not based on the review or determination of category of use. So it is a little bit of a different animal. Joe, are you aware of any appeal process?
No, not offhand with the appeals for the stormwater utility, but there is a credit and adjustment manual So there's opportunities in that ordinance for customers to, make those specific requests.
I'll take a look and see if we have something that gives some direction that we're mirroring that here. If there isn't, do you have a thought on which body you would like to hear the appeal? Would you like it to be one body and that body is, decision is final?
I think it makes sense to make it the Public Works decision as far as approving or disapproving an appeal.
And I'll agree with that. And I guess for further clarification, the reason why I would say that, and not to take any power away from staff, but the reason why the appeal wouldn't start at staff is because you guys are already making the decision, the initial decision, based on facts. So you guys are assumed, almost kind of like an assessor in this, is the presumption is that staff is accurate. So now the appeal or the appellant needs to prove that staff erred somehow. So that's why it's already at that next level.
Right.
Your guys' decision on what the property is, that's already the first step that's already
Correct.
taken.
Right, and that's the objective here, is it's an administrative appeal process so that it gives the public the ability that staff is not the final say-so and shouldn't be. So, right. Okay. The last section is the billing and collection of fees. And it will reference, and I think we still have some language, the Waterworks and Lighting Commission has a policy in place for how fees are distributed to the various utilities if a payment is not made in full. And I recommend that this ordinance recognize whatever that method is, so that if, and I don't know exactly how it's set up with Waterworks and Lighting, but it has something to do with, if one of the utility bills is in arrears for a longer period of time, that one gets addressed first. And, but they have a method for that. And I would recommend that we just be as consistent as possible and recognize that method for that distribution of fees to the appropriate utilities. The rest of it's the same as any other utility.
And I think that's what we're after, is to be similar with the rest, consistent with the rest.
So unless there are any other questions, or you think we've had a significant omission, if there's something that was on anyone's mind, I know the question from the meeting last week, from Alderperson Bemke about some of the methodology. I did, it was a little bit tardy, but I did get that request into R.A. Smith, given that we don't have the manual, and I used I used the example that he gave. I took 3 different businesses that likely have 3 different similar businesses. They likely have 3 very different levels of trips, and offered those parcel IDs and address locations. They're all on connecting highways, just different streets within the city, but it's all, as similar as possible, but with very different, likely very different trip generation. How does that manual address that? And I'm awaiting a response. And when I get that response, I'll pass that on. But I mean, that was I guess once we have the manual, and once we see if it's, to some extent based on area of the facility, whatever it is for that particular item, I don't think that's necessarily consistent for every type of property use, that it's, some are based on, I think schools are based on student count, some facilities are based on square footage of the facility. But again, the manual has studied this for over, I think it's over 40 years, and is determined, based on actual counts, how it prorates out.
For me, something that comes to mind on that, and Mr. Bemke's question was, like for gas stations, a facility that has, say, 20 gas pumps, and then there's another facility that has 4.
Right.
There should be a difference between the two.
Yes, and I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
And like I said, when I get that information, I'll pass it on. If we don't have anything else that's missing, or anything that you feel is substantially off, we'll just quickly reference Table A. I put some numbers in here just for some reference to substantiate some of this, but, we gave, for the study, we were looking at 1.7 million for public works construction budget, taking our 2020 through 2023 capital improvement plan and averaging it, we're about 1.54, so we're pretty close, and if we add a little contingency, 10% to that, we're at 1.69, 1.692, and our study called for 1.7. So I think that number's right on. Asphalt resurfacing, our recommendation from the committee was to add 450,000. That's what, when I had asked them a month or so ago and what we had at the last meeting, that's what they added, so that S2 plus, what we reviewed last week, that's exactly the same amount. So the base fee takes then the total times 10%, so 223,000 collected in base fees divided by 7,400 customers gives us $2.52 a month for base fee. And that's per trip. And the cost allocated to the trip fee then is 90%, or $2 million, over 340,000 trips. So that's $5.92 per trip, that's annually. Recommending an administrative appeal fee of $150 for staff time, I think that's reasonable, for staff review, investigation, and a determination. I think that's essentially all we would need in Table A, is something like this. If there were a desire at some point in time in the future to start to move some of the maintenance activities into the transportation utility, well, then Table A would need to reflect maintenance activities. If there was a desire to generate funding specifically for a replacement city garage, for example, then that would need to be in here. And so this would be defined and adjusted likely on an annual basis, and the rest of the ordinance language can probably remain unchanged. So that's what we've got so far.
Real quick, I think the only thing that I kind of picked out, and I'm not, I missed the discussion last week, but you had mentioned about parks, charging against parks. And the only thing, and again, I missed discussion, so maybe this was answered or talked about, but sometimes one hand is washing the other, paying the other, and so then would we be taking out of levy to actually kind of pay this? Would there be a cap on that, just in case, if it was a case where, like say Robinson Park or Ben Hansen Park, or cumulatively all the parks together now are somehow generating or theoretically generating more money than we actually anticipated, that money is coming against the levy itself.
That's correct. So for parks, for example, in that 340,000 trips, the trips to the city's parks are part of that 340,000. the trips to City Hall are included in that 340,000 trips. So just like the city or those parks would pay a utility bill for water, sewer, power, the parks would also pay a transportation utility fee. And again, the ITE manual will determine, you know, the parameters for the basis of what trips parks create, and then there's a fee appropriate for that. And when I get that spreadsheet, I think it would be beneficial for the city, once we get that spreadsheet, for that spreadsheet to be part of, or creating a web page where someone could put in an address or parcel ID, and it would just spit out, okay, for what we're proposing, here's your monthly fee. Once we have that spreadsheet, we'd have the capability of doing that. We could look at then at each one of the parks individually and see, well, you know, we're looking at, you know, $300 a year for a particular park. So I don't believe in any way, shape, or form these utility fees are going to be something that's going to be so costly as to break any business, any city department. You know, it's a utility bill, and because it's spread out and what we've got in it is pretty conservative, it'll be a relatively reasonable amount.
Any final thoughts, Mr. Austin?
I think it's pretty cut and dry. I think it looks great. Thank you for your hard work putting this together, and I look forward to talking more about this.
Mr. Rayholm, do you have any thoughts? Yeah, and Mr. Terry, I think that this is very thorough. I think that this is, if there was a challenge to this, or at least this is obviously a draft, I think that this is very comprehensive. This isn't willy-nilly. I don't think that we're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. I think that this is a wonderful, at least initial draft, but moving forward. So, no, thank you very much for that.
Well, and I guess I'd just like to comment, I'm pleased that as staff that we've had this opportunity. I know when we were looking at this, there were suggestions that when it comes time to writing the ordinance, we probably have to farm it out. Probably going to be a cost, maybe not a whole lot different than what we had for the evaluation. And, you know, our staff was able to help develop this, and I'm certainly proud to be a part of it. And I think it's nice to point out that, you know, between the city attorney and finance department staff and mayor and engineering department staff and street department staff that, you know, that we have these capabilities in-house.
Very good. Good job, everybody, on this. With that being said, nothing else on this particular item. We will move on to it. There was no requirement for action on this. Okay. So then we'll move on to item number 4, review the Director of Public Works monthly report.
The monthly report is online on the city's website, on the Public Works homepage. Very few things. I'll just point out a couple highlights. As we have the last several months, just kind of keeping everyone up to date on where our degradation fees are at and what the city has generated in them. Just shy of 50,000 was generated at the time the report was written so far this year. And those are dollars that otherwise our taxpayers were paying for utility work that was otherwise damaging the streets. So this $50,000 so far, you know, that goes a long ways to repairing some of these streets that have a significant amount of utility excavations. So I'm real happy with how that's working out, and the administration's going well. I'm pleased to announce that our construction projects are moving along very well. Our 15th Street from Norton to Apricot, that project is complete, including restoration. The staff did a great job on that. Again, that was an in-house project. Our Jefferson Street from 25th Avenue North to the east dead end of the industrial park is complete. The 11th Street North project, our city underground infrastructure work is now complete. So we're waiting on curb and gutter flat work, paving, and restoration there. The Metalco rail spur project, due to some challenges, and we are still discussing and debating with the consulting engineer on those. The staff perspective is that those plans were incomplete and inaccurate, and it makes it impossible for anyone, whether it's a contractor or the city, to actually determine actual quantities. And based on the cross-sections on the plans, the city decided to use its own workforce to do the initial excavation and preparation of that rail bed. And unfortunately, the plans were inaccurate to the point where the excavation work was substantially more than we expected. So we're discussing those as errors and omissions, and I intend to work with our city attorney and see if we should be requesting some of our design fees paid back. But I'm proud to say that the street department staff, they worked hard and fast, and although that work was substantial and significant, we are not behind schedule. In fact, we just started 18th Avenue from West Grand to Russell today. So we're on schedule with our construction projects, and I couldn't be more pleased with that. Want to mention, that work is in collaboration. We've got utilities we're working with, our engineering staff, communications, in our street department, and I think we've come a long ways, and that shows by the amount of work that we're getting done in this accelerated schedule. And I'd like to point out some of the things that our staff's capable of. And under shop and repairs, we completed a 500-hour service on the new excavator and replacing the undercarriage on our dozer. That's work that a lot of places would farm that out, and it costs thousands. And we've got talented mechanics on staff that are able to do that work. And we probably save, just on the undercarriage work, we're probably going to save somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 in real savings. So I'm happy with that. And one of the things that I've struggled with, and that the city has struggled with for years, is ride quality over our manhole structures in the streets. It's been a challenge. When I've looked back, it's been a challenge for decades within the city, and it is on other projects elsewhere in the state. I challenge staff to come up with some methods. We've got some different equipment. We're trying some different methods, and if you care to take a look, we've just completed some of our first repairs using those methods over on Chestnut by Assumption, and I think they turned out fantastic. We have a number more of those to do on Chestnut, and then we have some to do on Baker. It's going to take a little time for the crew to get up to speed on the equipment and the methodology. It's a little different than what we've done in the past, but I'm really happy with the ride quality. You can drive over them, you can tell it's there, but it's not thumping anything. It's just a little bump. So just wanted to recognize the good work of all of our staff in Public Works this month.
Thank you for that, Mr. Terry. Mr. Austin, do you got any questions, comments on the report?
No, we'll need to approve this, right?
No,
No?
we don't.
No action? Okay.
No.
No.
Mr. Eom, do you got any questions, concerns on the report? Perfect. I'm going to have to go down. I didn't go down Chestnut Street, but coincidentally, I stumbled upon the pavement work on Jefferson, and I didn't even realize that's where the turnaround or the circle was. It fit right in, perfect. So comparatively to what it was prior, fantastic job on that. So with that being said, we will move on to item number 5, review referral list. I do not have anything for the referral list, so anybody else chime in.
I did, at the request of Alderperson Evanson, add a referral to review parking ordinance for any inconsistencies between ordinance language and signage throughout the city. That's a collaborative project between our street department and our engineering department to do that review. It's going to take a little bit of time, and so I did ask her if this was pressing or if we could have a little time to work on that, and she wasn't particularly concerned, just wanted to make sure it got done. So I did add this to the list with Chairperson Kubiszak's permission. I was wondering what the thought was since the new park study is considering the potential for public access in natural areas around Norton Pond. That's been a long time referral for Public Works. Is it something that we would like to keep on Public Works, or given that the master plan for parks is taking that up? That's item number 3. Is there a desire to leave that on the Public Works referral list or potentially remove it?
I think historically, the reason why we had it on this maybe is because I know Mr. Rayom, it's one in his district, and then 2, I think you had brought something up, or maybe a resident had brought something up, and it was one thing that I know he had talked about it, and because there really wasn't any other avenue. But if that is the case where Parks is starting to look at this type of stuff, I don't think that there is necessarily a need for this on Public Works Committee, but Mr. Austin, if you've got any thoughts on this.
No, I agree. I think we can remove it here from Public Works, and if Parks wants to take it up, so be it.
Go ahead and do that, Mr. Terry, then.
And I had a similar question with item 6. Is there still a desire to consider the development of a large item garbage collection program? You know, we've talked about this in the past, and financially it would be challenging. We haven't received any new information as far as any other way to do it that might be cost-effective or time-effective. Do we want to leave this on the referral list, or is that one that we should also potentially remove?
I think for the historical perspective of this, this was an item that was on prior to our automated garbage system, collection system. And if we don't have any new information, or at least data that we can go with, and then I think the number one thing is that if we have residents that would be corresponding with us, I don't have anybody that has called, at least in the last year or so, for large item pickup or email or any type of correspondence. So I think we can always address it. It's something that we don't necessarily need to have specifically on this. We could remove this, and if it's something that the committee or the council wants to address because of correspondence in the future, I think we have the ability to do that. So, Mr. Austin, what is your feelings on this?
I agree, Mr. Kubiszak, with that, especially with the city moving to the automated system. We really don't have the equipment for large item pickup. So at this time, I think, without having any complaints myself, I think it's probably best to remove that off the list as well.
Any other items for the referral list? Not hearing any further, we will move on to item number 6, adjournment. Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
I will second that. Motion by Mr. Austin, second by Mr. Kubiszak to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carried 2-0. Meeting adjourned at 7 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody.